Welcome, everybody, and Merry Christmas to you. In fact, have you ever been wished a Merry Apocryphal Christmas before? This may be your first time, and I'm glad to welcome you to the December 2025 Bible and Beyond discussion. I'm your host, Shirley Paulson, and tonight I'm so happy to tell you that Dr. Tony Burke has come back to our Bible and Beyond discussion to wish us an Apocryphal Christmas. So I don't know where he keeps digging up these wild apocryphal tales about early Christians that we've never heard of before, but they're always interesting and thought-provoking. So I'll be very interested in hearing what's going on specifically in the Christmas apocryphal world. If this is your first time to get to know Tony, let me tell you just a little about where he's coming from. First, I can say he's from Toronto, where he's a professor in the Department of Humanities at York University. He's also co-founder of the North American Society for the Study of Christian Apocryphal Literature, which means he's an expert in Christian Apocrypha. And if that's not enough apocryphal things, his very informative blog is called Apocryphicity. If you've never heard of that word before, go look up his blog. So before this conversation is over today, I hope everyone will have a good feel for what Tony means with the use of the word Apocrypha. Tony, it's so great to have you with us again tonight. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for asking me. It's always a pleasure.
Great. So here you have built a whole career around this rather provocative, perplexing word, Apocrypha. And I think we better start there. Could you give us a working definition of Apocrypha and then what Apocryphal Christmas means?
Sure. I basically define Christian Apocrypha as stories, traditions, maybe some teachings by and about Jesus and his followers, so his apostles and women disciples, and his family, for the most part, that are not in the Bible. So these are mostly narratives. These are stories. These are not sermons. These are not homilies. These are stories, narratives about these characters that we don't find in the Bible today. And you mentioned just about where I come from this. I started getting interested in Apocrypha when I was doing, I think, my master's. And the text that interested me is an Infancy Gospel. It's called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. Some people may have some acquaintance with it. So that text is about Jesus from the ages of 5 to 12. So it's this little part of Jesus' life that kind of fits into the Bible where there's nothing really said about it. And the other main infancy gospel is one we'll talk about more tonight, and that's the Proevangelium of James. We'll talk about that later. But I thought we maybe should set the stage a little bit by making it clear what is in the Bible about Jesus' birth, about Christmas, before we say what's not in the Bible.
Okay, yeah.
And sometimes people are struck by how different the accounts in the Bible are. We have two of them. One is in Matthew, one is in Luke. And in Matthew's version, Matthew begins with a genealogy tracing Jesus all the way back to Abraham. And we're introduced to Mary and Joseph, who live in Bethlehem. Mary becomes pregnant, and Joseph is told in a dream that the child was conceived by the Holy Spirit. It's like, this calms Joseph down. After Jesus is born, the Magi come to visit Jesus in his home in Bethlehem. And Herod the Great tries to kill him because he's worried about a new king once he hears that from the Magi. So the family flee to Egypt, and then they come back to Galilee, where they go to Nazareth, not Bethlehem. Luke begins with the birth of John the Baptist, who we are told is the cousin of Jesus. Then we meet Mary, who's in Nazareth, not Bethlehem, and she gets visited by an angel rather than Joseph. They have to go to Bethlehem for a census. And then we have the famous story about there's no room at the inn. There's too many people around. So they end up being accommodated in a manger, a place where the animals are. And then we hear the story of shepherds in the field who are told by an angel about this birth, and they come to visit the family in the stable. Then we get a few more stories in Luke. We get the story of Jesus' presentation at the temple, his circumcision, and then the story of him at the age of 12, astounding the doctors in the temple. And then finally, it finishes up, a little bit later on, with another genealogy, this one tracing Jesus all the way back to Adam. So what is apocryphal then is any tradition or text or iconography, so images, that combines adds to or in some way, other way, develops that material we find in the Bible. And people may not be aware how much these traditions are already combined and enhanced in our everyday lives at this time of year. So if you don't mind, Shirley, if you could just show that scene.
Sure. Right. Okay. I'm going to share the screen here. So hang on just a second while I do that. Does that look right to you?
Yeah. So this is just a typical nativity scene that I grabbed off the internet. Everyone will probably recognize the basic iconography of the scene. But what you see there is that Matthew and Luke have been combined into one story here. We have the shepherds in the stable and the Magi, but the Magi shouldn't be at the stable. They should be in Bethlehem, according to Matthew. And we have a stable. Well, we'll talk about the stable later. But we have an ox and an ass in the background, ox and a donkey, which we see all the time in nativity scenes. But it's not really mentioned in the Bible. It seems to be a fulfillment of Isaiah 1:3, which says, "The ox knows its master, the donkey its owner's manger, but Israel does not know. My people do not understand." Also, kind of apocryphal or non-biblical here, the Magi are three. There are three Magi. Traditionally, that's what it has been, probably because it corresponds to the three gifts, frankincense, gold, and myrrh. But we don't really know how many Magi there are. And if you really want to make it a bit more apocryphal, you can add the little drummer boy, if you want to just go to the next slide.
Okay.
Who some people sometimes drop into a nativity scene, or you maybe see TV shows which integrate him. Little Drummer Boy, not biblical at all. He's actually comes from a song that was composed in 1941. So he's our most recent addition to the nativity scene. Now, it's all fair in iconography to combine elements. We'll look at that in a minute. Like, iconography isn't necessarily meant to show one scene necessarily in a historical setting. It can combine multiple things, but most people aren't aware of that. They see this nativity scene and they think this is the Christmas story, but really it's two Christmas stories and some other elements thrown in as well.
So, Tony, it's interesting that we tend to think of there being one story here. And there's another little part of the story that I think we always hear about with Mary riding on a donkey.
Right.
So is that also, that's not in the Bible, is it? Where does that come from?
No, it's not there either. It's kind of assumed because, they according to Luke, they have to get from Nazareth to Bethlehem for the census, so they got to get there some way, right? But we do have a text that specifically or explicitly talks about this journey. And this is a text called the Protevangelium of James, or the Infancy Gospel of James. And this is one of the earliest apocryphal texts. It's written around the late 2nd century. And it's very, very popular. There are almost 200 manuscripts of this text in Greek alone, and then there's lots of other languages. It's very, very widespread. And it's almost canonical in a sense in churches of the East. And it's a bit like this nativity scene. It combines Matthew and Luke into one story, so it harmonizes them. And then it adds additional stories and elements, just like we've been talking about additional elements. So the text actually begins with Mary's conception by her elderly parents, Anna and Joachim. And because they want a child so badly, they promise that if they have a child, they will dedicate the child to the temple, and that's what they do. When the child reaches 2 years of age, they take her to the temple, and she's raised there, fed by angels. And at the age of 12, she is removed from the temple and given into the care of an old man named Joseph. And so he's not a young man in this story. And then follows the Annunciations, the journey to Bethlehem, the birth, etc. But there's one particularly noteworthy story in this, a noteworthy addition. And this is the story of Salome the midwife. And how it happens, well, we haven't talked about the journey, but there is a journey of Joseph and Mary and Joseph's sons. He has sons from a previous marriage, going from Nazareth to Bethlehem. So we get that story. But they come close to Bethlehem, and Mary is about to give birth. So Joseph finds a cave and leaves Mary there and goes off in search of a midwife. The midwife, unfortunately, arrives too late. The child is born. But in a miraculous way, which we can talk about a little bit. Well, no, I'll mention it now. He's actually born. He comes out of Mary in the form of light, and then coalesces into a human figure. So the reason for this is there's an interest in making Mary a perpetual virgin, meaning she was a virgin before she had before she gave birth to Jesus. and she's a virgin after, and in every physical way. So, to put it bluntly, her hymen is not broken in the birth process. Jesus comes out like light. But Salome, the midwife, she comes in and she's a bit doubtful about this whole idea that Mary is a perpetual virgin. She's never seen something like that before. So she goes in to test Mary, a gynecological test. And because of her lack of faith, her hand withers, it burns up. And then it's healed by touching Jesus, but that's what happens. Now, this text is so popular in the Christian East, as I mentioned, that it exerted a large influence on Eastern nativity scenes. And if you could go to the next slide. This is a typical Eastern nativity scene. And what you'll see here, first off, is Mary is in a cave, not a manger, as we see in the Protevangelium of James. We still see the ox and ass there too. And to the bottom, so we see the Magi, we see the shepherds, they're all there as we expect, the angel, the star. And to the bottom right, we see Salome there, the midwife, but she's washing Jesus. I know Jesus is also in the middle in a manger, but he can be in two places at once in iconography. They don't, like I said, it's not one static scene. And then the other very common element is Joseph sitting there looking wistful or exhausted. I'm not sure what he's doing, or feeling useless in some way. Now, Salome in the Protevangelium of James is not talked about as being a nurse to Jesus. She's a midwife who checks Mary's virginal status. But in older versions of this scene, you do see that. So if you can go on to the next slide for me, Shirley. This is from a very early ivory book cover. So this would have been around a Bible. And it has scenes relating to Mary. And it's from somewhere between the 6th and 8th century. But it shows Salome in the very middle there with a withered hand. She's holding her hand out. Oh. The rest of it is the other elements of the nativity scene, including Mary. I think that's Mary with Jesus. Very hard to see. Joseph's there. Ox and ass each side of the grave, each side of the manger. If you go to the next scene, this is another very early one. This is this is from the same ivory book cover. What you see here is the Annunciation to Mary on the left. What's called the test of bitter waters in the middle, where the priests test Mary to see if she's been adulterous or not. And then you see the donkey, Mary on the donkey, along with Joseph being led by an angel. And then one more, I think, is this is called a pyxis. I think you burn incense in it, if I remember. And on the left, you see the donkey scene again, where Mary's coming along the donkey. And on the right, you see Salome again, holding up her withered hand. So I think over time, people moved away from the traditional story of Salome, but they kept her in there because it's so much a part of the iconography. But they just make her the nurse rather than someone who gets punished for not believing in the virgin birth.
Wow. So let me ask you, I don't know if this relates directly to this or not, or we can go on, but I'm just interested in the fact that we have so many apocryphal writings going to such great lengths to give us more elaborate stories than we find in the Bible. So why is that? And why can't they be happy with what's in the Bible?
Okay. First off, maybe if you want to stop sharing the screen, because
let's do that.
We have a couple more pictures to look at later, but we have
sure. Okay.
Well, there are several reasons for why we get apocryphal texts. For one thing, the Gospel of John says if something to the effect of that there's lots of other stories about Jesus that cannot be fit in this book. There's so many. So we know that there were other traditions circulating in even the first few centuries, but even later, that writers could feel that they want to incorporate into their own works. So you get canonical ideas mixed with non-canonical ideas. Another reason why you get these texts is to sometimes fix the story. Like the Gospels were all composed separately, and then they get brought together over time. And there are inconsistencies in them. The infancy narratives themselves are inconsistent, right? Why does Joseph go to Bethlehem? Do the Magi come to the house or to the stable? Those kinds of inconsistencies. So what you see with, say, Protevangelium of James is it's harmonizing the story so that it's one long story, but also fixing the inconsistencies along the way. Another reason about you get these texts is to answer questions that are left by the canonical texts. Mysteries. For example, when Herod wants to kill Jesus, all of the infant boys in Bethlehem are killed. What about John the Baptist? What happens to him? He's not in Bethlehem. He's in Jerusalem. But still, if he's going after all of these infants, what happens? And the very last story in the Protevangelium of James explains that. That Herod's soldiers come to get John, and John's mother Elizabeth takes him out into the desert, asks God to help her, and a mountain opens, and they go inside, and the mountain closes, and they're kept safe. So that answers that question. Another question is the Gospel of, well, all three of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, mention that Jesus had brothers and sisters. But as the tradition develops that Mary is a perpetual virgin, who are these brothers and sisters? So Protevangelium of James answers that by saying, well, they are brothers, and the only brothers I mentioned, but they are siblings of a previous marriage. Joseph is an old man. He's had other children. And the last one, I don't want to take too long for the answer here. The last reason why we get these apocryphal texts is to introduce new dogma, new ideas, like the perpetual virginity of Mary, which we see again in Protevangelium of James, but also the Immaculate Conception, which a lot of people think is the virgin birth, but it's not. It's Mary's birth. Mary was born without sin. So how do we get that idea? Well, Anna and Joachim are childless. They need help from God to conceive, and they have a miraculous birth in which this very aged couple has this child, and she is considered to be without sin. And we can talk about that a bit more later on. So new texts get written in order to promote these new ideas or work out these new ideas. What's one thing I really like about apocryphal literature is how much, or how it's used, how do I express this better? How it uses Christian characters and the Christian scene of the first century to think with, right? How do you work out these problems as they come along? Well, you tell a story. And so it's, like I said, it's not sermons, it's not homilies, it's characters that people are playing with. And I think that's what makes it really interesting.
Wow. Okay, that's really helpful to see, like, they're not just writing up stories to make stories. But that leads me to the next question I want to ask you then about why we're writing this. Could you talk a little bit about the theological ideas behind these? Like, even in the Protevangelium of James, is there any particular theological reason that Jesus is, say, born in a cave instead of the inn, or having a midwife? What are the theological issues going on here?
Yeah, the inn is interesting. Our earliest statement about the cave as being the location, it comes from a writer of the 2nd century named Justin Martyr, and he talks about how people know where this cave is and they visit it. And I think in the West, we've come to think of it as a stable because that's where people in the West put their animals. But people in the East might put them in caves that are nearby. So when the Gospel of Luke talks about putting the family with the animals, it's our assumption it's a stable. But in the East, the assumption would be a cave, and that's where they came up with the cave. And again, people seem to be visiting it very, very early in the tradition. And, as traditions go along, there are more and more holy sites for people to visit, but this is a very early one. Now, about the midwife, we have a few early Christian texts that include something called a testimonium about Mary not requiring a midwife and feeling no pain in childbirth. By testimonium, I mean it's just a little sentence or so that gets circulated, a statement being made about Mary. And we don't know exactly where it came from, but it pops up in various texts. But anyway, the testimonium, the statement is, Mary did not require a midwife and felt no pain in childbirth. Now, why would you want to state that? Well, the pain of childbirth comes from the story of Genesis. After Adam and Eve disobeyed God, God curses women with the pain of childbirth. Now, Mary is considered pure and sinless. She needs to be considered a worthy vessel to carry Jesus. Jesus can't be in just anybody. So her childbirth, she doesn't need to feel pain, and that's how does that happen? Well, again, Jesus comes out of Mary as light, and then coalesces into human. So the midwife functions in Protevangelium of James simply for the virginity test. We don't need a midwife because that all gets taken care of in this rather supernatural way. So no midwife, no pain in childbirth.
So is there like a theological message again for Mary's role in her motherhood here? Or is that what you're telling us here? I mean, I just wonder, I guess I'm not clear about why Mary would be of such importance in this when Jesus is the key feature, but Mary seems to be the key character in the Protevangelium. And so is there a theological reason for that I'm wondering about?
What it seems to be happening in the first several centuries is this elevation of Mary. And it comes to a point in the 4th century where she's actually declared Mother of God. And she has a certain amount of honors, and you get lots of texts written about her and various, again, holy sites and so on and so forth. So she becomes really esteemed. And there are arguments in Christianity about whether that's appropriate or not, but it certainly happens. But one aspect of her motherhood in this text, I mentioned earlier, she is without sin. And just to go back to this a little bit, the humans are tainted by sin because of the story of Genesis, the original sin of Adam and Eve of disobedience. So again, Mary has to be this perfect vessel, so she cannot have original sin because that sin would then be transferred to Jesus. So she is immaculately conceived. She's this is almost miraculous conception. Actually, in the text as it happens, Joachim is so upset about not being able to conceive a child with his wife. He goes out into the desert, prays. He comes back, his wife is pregnant. So did he have anything to do with this birth or not? So it's a bit ambiguous in the text. But Mary is born without sin. That's the important part. And there are efforts throughout the text to say more about Mary's purity. After she's born, she never touches the ground before she's taken to the temple, and temple's a holy place, so she can walk around there fine. I mentioned earlier, she's fed by an angel. She gets nothing impure in her body. She gets divine food. And this sense of divinity, not divinity, I shouldn't say divinity, the sense of purity of Mary and her immunity to original sin is carried over into traditions about her death. This is a teaching known as the Dormition of Mary. And when Mary dies, well, first off, I should back up. Genesis story curses women with pain in childbirth. It also curses humans with death. So if she's not part of original sin, she shouldn't have to die. And so when she does die in the text, well, there's two ways it's expressed in the text because they vary quite a lot. But in one, she just goes up body and soul into heaven, does not die at all. In other versions, she dies, but her soul and body are reunited in heaven immediately. So she's immune to several things. She's immune to pain in childbirth, and she's immune to a normal human death. And this is because she's not tainted by original sin, and then that sin does not get transferred to Jesus.
Wow. And that leads me then to Joseph. I mean, that's so interesting to hear about why Mary has to play that particular role theologically, but also what about Joseph? What makes him the father or the substitute for Jesus? Why is he important in there?
Well, you need a daddy.
Okay, true.
Well, Jesus' paternity in the New Testament is rather ambiguous. Most scholars believe that the Gospel of Mark is the earliest of the New Testament Gospels, and Joseph does not appear there at all. Right. We have brothers and sisters, but we don't know who the father is, and Jesus is referred to as the son of Mary, which is odd, because usually it's you are Ben Joseph, not Ben Mary, son of Joseph, son of the Father. So he doesn't show up at all, which is strange. Matthew and Luke, when they copy Mark and make changes to Mark, they supply Joseph the carpenter as his father, both in the infancy narratives and in one reference later on in the text. But generally, for the rest of the Gospels, Joseph is completely absent. So a tradition kind of developed that he was an older man, and older than Mary, and he died. And so you see that reflected again in Protevangelium of James as an older man, and also explains again these siblings of Jesus. But you need a Joseph, really, because you need to connect Jesus with the lineage of David. And I mentioned the two genealogies that Matthew and Luke have. And one goes back to Abraham, one goes back to Adam, but they still have David somewhere in there. And Joseph is a descendant of David. And in a sense, he's adopting Jesus as his own because he's not the father, but that makes Jesus adopted into the lineage of David. It's a bit silly in a sense because he's not the real father. So why does it really matter anyway? He comes directly from God, but Christians are always very intent in this early period to connect Jesus with what they see as prophecies in the Hebrew Bible. The Messiah should come from the line of David. The Messiah is also supposed to be the product of a virgin birth. So how do you reconcile those two things? Well, you get the Davidic lineage from Joseph, who is his adopted father. Now, we don't see a lot of Joseph in other apocryphal texts. Certainly in the Protevangelium of James, he shows up. Doesn't do a lot more than we see in the canonical Gospels. He also shows up in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, the text I worked on. And here Joseph is in the unenviable position of trying to teach Jesus right. So if anyone has a toddler, they know that sometimes these toddlers can be problems. They might do temper tantrums, but imagine a toddler with the power of a god, and bad things can happen. So Joseph has to try and teach him and bring him to teachers to learn. So it's pretty difficult for Joseph to do. And then the last text we have really with Joseph is called The History of Joseph the Carpenter. And in this text, this text is about Joseph's death, basically. So we have this death scene where Jesus returns from wherever he is, and he comes home, and Joseph has this very emotional death scene. So it's really interesting for that. We also see sometimes some iconography of Joseph with the young Jesus. I was in Germany last year, and I saw a few examples of this. So you just see these scenes of Joseph in the carpenter's shop with Jesus there, or holding Jesus' hand as they walk along. So those are not biblical either, but they're just these idyllic scenes of a perfect kind of father-son relationship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how are we going to do this, Tony? I'm going to make sure we see the different slides that you have.
Sure.
We've got a few more minutes before everybody else gets the microphone to ask you questions. So do you want to walk us through the rest of the slides you have, or what do you think is next best to talk about for a couple minutes?
Yeah, let's do that fairly quickly.
Okay.
There's a couple more texts I can talk about.
All right. Okay, let's do that then. Let's see here. Okay.
All right. So the other, I've talked about these two Infancy Gospels already, Infancy Gospel of Thomas and Infancy Gospel or Protevangelium of James. The other most well-known Infancy Gospel is called the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. It's called Pseudo-Matthew because there's this tradition that it was written by Matthew, but we don't think it was. So Pseudo-Matthew. And it began as an expansion of Protevangelium of James into Latin. So it translates Protevangelium of James, but then adds some extra things to it. And because it's Latin, it brings the stories from the east to the west. And it's also very, very popular in the West. There are hundreds of manuscripts of this text, and the stories show up in iconography. And so I just wanted to show a couple of images of these. This is from a 14th century manuscript, and this is a French version of the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, so a French translation. And what you have in the top left-hand corner there is a nativity scene, like with some aspects we've seen already. There's the ox and ass looming over the manger. There's Joseph looking a bit bored or something. On the right, we get the beginning of some stories that are only in the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. So we have, all the Protevangelium of James stuff, and then we have some unique stuff. And here is this is a story from the flight to Egypt. And you have Joseph leading Mary on the donkey and holding Jesus. And it's hot and they're tired and they come to a cave and they want to rest. But out of the cave comes some dragons. And fortunately, Jesus is there. He's got superpowers, and he's able to basically tell the dragons to go away, and so that leaves the family alone. And in the bottom left-hand corner is another story from the flight story. And in this part, Mary, again, is tired, and she's hungry, and she sits down beneath a date palm tree, and Jesus orders he's like, what, I don't know, a week old. I don't know how old he is, but he speaks and he orders the date palm tree to bend down and give Mary some of its fruit. And in the last story, again, this is also during the flight story. And here's a story of Jesus coming to a pagan temple, so Greco-Roman gods or Egyptian gods. And usually the story goes that he enters the temple and the idols, the statues, fall down and shatter, showing that the true God has entered. In this depiction, though, you see the demons leaving at the back of the temple, and it was the belief that the statues of the gods of other religions were inhabited by demons. So you have these variations of this kind of a story where either the idols shatter or the demons leave them, and so that's what we get here. So it's interesting. We get these additional stories that are told in this other version of the Infancy Gospel of James. And we also have some manuscripts of this Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew that also includes the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. So here's that again, that effort to kind of bring all the stories together in one. And if I have time for one more image, Shirley, can we do that? Or
let's go. Yeah, trying to get it here.
This is one that's less widely known. This comes from a text called the Tiburtine Sibyl. You may have heard of Sibyls before. They're like Greek and Roman prophet or oracle figures. This is, again, a very, very popular text. It's about 130 manuscripts of this text in Latin. And in the story, the oracle, the Sibyl, prophesies events about Christian history up to the time of Charlemagne in the 8th or 9th century. So here we have a pagan prophet talking about Jesus. And in one section, the Sibyl addresses the citizens of Rome on the Aventine Hill in Rome and predicts the life of Jesus, predicting the coming of Jesus, the birth of Jesus during the reign of the Emperor Augustus. And this is presented in art fairly commonly. In this image here, you see the Sibyl pointing up and Augustus beside her, and she's pointing up at an image of Mary with the child Jesus. So she's showing him that this birth is going to happen. It's going to be the end of the Roman Empire, essentially. And I don't have an image of this, but one of the more interesting depictions of this is on an altar that's in the Ara Coeli church in Rome. Very hard church to find. I tried. I couldn't find it. But in this church, and you can see it today, there's an altar, and it's got the image of Mary and Jesus in that circle there, the mandola, and also Augustus is there too. And it has an inscription on it, and it says, Caesar Octavian, it's another name for Augustus, erected this altar when the offspring of heaven was revealed to him. So this tradition has it that this is the place where this happened, and he erected this altar, and now this church has now been built around it. And again, you can go see that today if you hopefully find someone who can help you find it. Yeah, there you go.
Oh my goodness. Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for that. Let me just see here. So we are really about time for everyone else to join the conversation, and you can just sort of get your questions ready. Will I pause for a moment to remind everybody that your participation as a Bible and Beyond Patreon subscriber is a win-win for you and for our Bible and Beyond production team. We clearly rely on your support to make events like this one happen. And we want to make it a special experience for you too. When you become a monthly paying subscriber on Patreon, you are entitled to a variety of special gifts, and you're part of a very important community, us. So I think Toto has posted some more information about how to sign up on Bible and Beyond Patreon. So let's open it up now for your questions. So since there are more people than on my screen, it's helpful if you use your electronic hand for me to see you. And if not, then Toto will guide me to people if I'm missing you. Right, Toto? Yeah, thank you. Okay. So is anybody ready with a question? Because if not, I have plenty to go with. So while you're thinking about your questions, then I'm wondering, Tony, if you might just talk to us a little bit about your overall thought about these apocryphal texts. Like, are they just too much of an academic thing to have any personal reaction to them, or how do you feel about them?
Yeah, it's kind of one of the things that students always ask their Bible professors is
Yeah,
what do you believe?
yeah, 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 yeah.
And I grew up Catholic, but I'm more of an atheist these days. But what interests me about biblical texts and the non-biblical texts is I just love stories, and I'm interested in the way that people use stories to deal with problems, with changes in their life, and ways to try and explain their own particular existence. What's going to happen to me when I die? Where do I come from? How am I related to the divine world, et cetera, et cetera? So I don't have those beliefs, but I'm interested in how people use stories to do that. And I'm also interested in, when it comes to Apocrypha 2, how well, we've been talking about how we see it in our modern day, like the nativity scenes that we're seeing all the time, but also people are continually, even today, writing Apocrypha in a sense by making these adaptations of the Bible. So any Jesus film you see out there has got apocryphal elements in it because the biblical stories have these gaps, right? And you have to fill them in with something. An easy thing is if you're going to do a film about Jesus, what does he look like?
Yeah,
The Bible doesn't tell us that. So
yeah.
that's something that you're adding to it. And there have been a few movies about Mary, mother of Jesus, that draw upon the Protevangelium of James because it's a really good source for filling in, but also the directors will fill in some stuff themselves. And just out this year is a film called The Carpenter's Son, starring Nicolas Cage. I'm not sure if it's any good. It's got Nicolas Cage in it, so probably not. But it's an adaptation of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus as a child is hurting people. So it's kind of a horror story. I'm sure he plays very fast and loose with the story. But, people are still interested in telling new stories.
Hmm.
And some people may feel uncomfortable with that. And so I think it's probably helpful to get a good sense of what is canonical and what's non-canonical. And if you want to kind of build a fence around the canonical stuff so you have a good sense of it, of what should be scripture, and then just kind of enjoy what people are doing with the stories and how they're adapting them and using them to deal with new situations, new ideas, without hopefully feeling threatened by the fact that people are doing this. And I hope I get that across to my students when I teach this material. I don't think the apocryphal stuff have any particular historical value over canonical texts. Like, I don't think they tell us anything historical about Jesus and his family and so on. But they have the interest for telling us about Christians and about what they thought and what they experienced at different times in Christian history.
And I think that's what my takeaway from all this, Tony, is that your point here is that we're understanding the way Christians thought, and that so even though they have stories to tell, you still can sort of see what they're thinking and what things meant as it progressed through history. So that's kind of a very interesting point. All right, so Sarah has a question ready to go. Sarah?
Well, the first part of it is probably a little bit silly. I'm wondering if a t-shirt saying, "What would Jesus do?" fits in with this material. And all of a sudden that popped into my mind, Christian nationalism. And is that another aspect of this? Feeling like we've got to do more with that story than the Bible does. I don't know if I'm asking too much in that kind of a question, but it just popped into my head.
I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at. Where do you see the Christian nationalism?
Well, I guess you're talking about people creating stories to fill in the gaps of the canonical Gospels, and there seem to be like you say, a number of things that have happened. All the movies, and there were some, I think, fiction books that probably do the same thing, and artwork that may do some of the same thing. And it's just that the airwaves seem so full of the pros and cons about Christian nationalism. I wonder if it's maybe I don't want to say a perversion exactly, but it is sort of an exploration, I think, of how much power is involved in using Jesus as a I don't know, a symbol or a,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's often said that the Bible can be used for good or ill.
Yeah.
I think apocryphal process can be also used for good or ill. You can be supplying things in there for bad reasons. You don't see a lot of that, of bad things happening in that regard. But you see some problems of biblical interpretation connected to what you're saying about modern political things. When there was the crisis about illegal immigration, which is still an ongoing issue, but several years ago, people started to put up nativity scenes in which that were behind cages, talking about how the Joseph and Mary and Jesus, they were refugees in the flight story, and so people are using that to show, look, Jesus, the Holy Family were also refugees. Do you want to put them in cages too? And you would get the more right-leaning people reacting, saying no, they weren't immigrants, and no, they weren't refugees, and so on. So people are using the stories in modern political arenas as well, both for good and bad, depending on your own particular perspective. It always seems that the right don't quite understand the fact that Jesus was a person who welcomed the stranger, who welcomed the marginalized. That seems to not register in their Christian belief, unfortunately. Yeah, so there's that danger of creating new traditions that could be harmful, as well as just expressions of one's piety. Yeah.
It's sort of in the opposite direction now. It's making remember that, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, someone asked me to do a presentation about the nativity scenes, fresh scenes that people have.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know much about it, but I just started with good old Google and getting pictures, and around the world, every little culture, every big culture has done that in their own way, their own costumes, their own skin colors, their own musical instruments, their own animals from their part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it was supposed to be a 20-minute show. Mm-hmm. And I stopped after about half an hour, and I asked people if they had enough, and they said, no, keep on going. I think it lasted about an hour and 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. There were just so many different, and I didn't show everything that I had. Yeah. That the story has just been pivotal all the way around the world.
Mm-hmm. I no longer go to a Catholic church, but my wife goes to a United Church, which I like. It's very welcoming, and every year they do a nativity play, and they've been doing it for quite a while. And the person who's been presenting it recently, in the past 4 years or so, has said, I'm a bit kind of out of ideas if anyone has any suggestions. And I keep telling my wife, tell them to do the Infancy Gospel of James or Evangelium. Yeah, right. Maybe you have to be very sensitive about the Salome part of it, but you can make it a learning experience. Like, here's what this other take on the story is, and it's very popular in the East, and we still see it in these nativity scenes. I think it could be really interesting. It might be confusing for some people, maybe the children. But here's a different way of looking at it, and a non-harmful way of looking at it too, right?
And Sarah, you also asked a question that different. I think you have that in the chat where you said, "Did you feel that Mary was only 12 when the birth happened, when she gave birth to Jesus?"
This is one of the ways that we kind of fill in stuff that we don't know, that the Bible doesn't tell us. We try to think about what would be the typical in the time period. And the Bible tells us that Mary was betrothed to Joseph. She wasn't yet married, not yet living with him. And we do know from other sources that it would be typical for that to happen at a fairly young age. I think as young as 5 even, but it's just a plan at some point that this marriage will happen. So the Bible doesn't say anything about her age, but she could be around the age of 12 when a betrothal happened. That doesn't mean she conceived at that age, though. That's a bit young. but we don't know. There's no reference to ages at all in the text. But again, it's just about trying to figure out, well, what would the typical thing be? And certainly women did marry younger than the men did. The men would usually be in their early 20s, and the women would be somewhere in their mid-teens when actually, they join homes. And so, yeah, they did have children in their teenage years, but more the later teenage years than the early teenage years. But betrothal could happen at a fairly young age.
Interesting. So do you feel, oh, I'm sorry, Toto, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
No, I'm gonna go a different direction. So if you have something else to add.
No, you go ahead. Okay.
I gotta ask, is this the same Salome, or do they say this is the same Salome that we find in the like Thomas or the Gospels? No, it'd be Acts. Sorry.
No. It's in the Gospel of Thomas. Salome shows up. Another text called the Gospel of the Egyptians. Here she seems to be a disciple of Jesus. It's probably not the same character. We also have a Salome who is the daughter of Herod the Great. So it's a fairly common name. I tend to think of the Gospels as being a bit like reading Shakespeare. There's lots of Elizabeths, lots of Henrys. So we also have lots of Marys and a couple of Josephs, and a couple of Salomes as well. And there is a tendency sometimes to try and conflate these characters. I remember reading a Bible some years ago, and sometimes Bibles have these like extra indices and stuff, like appendices. And so I was looking at the back of it, and it's got a cast of characters for the Bible. And I looked up John for some reason, or just flicking through, and I noticed John. And that Bible said John was an apostle. He was also John the Baptist. He was also the John of the book of Revelation. So there's this tendency to conflate, right? But we need to be conscious of the fact that these are separate texts with separate cast of characters sometimes. And so try to resist combining them all unless there's a good reason to do so. And I've never seen a text which explicitly connects these Salomes. So I wouldn't assume, if we see no evidence that someone has done so, then there's no reason to believe that these are the same character.
That's a great question. Thank you, Toto. So I want to go back to that point you were making about the East versus West, when we have Mary being emphasized in the East and so forth. What I'm curious about is, as you see the progression of thought going on beyond, say, the 4th century or so, do you see changes in the Christmas story that kind of keep moving in a certain way, or is just everybody have different thoughts that keep throwing them in there and then they go away, or what happens afterwards? Is it all big free for all?
I think it mostly kind of settles. So you get the Protevangelium stuff going on in the East. You get the similar materials being passed along in the West, with the Gospel Pseudo Matthew just kind of translating and enhancing it. It doesn't take on quite the level of almost scriptural in the West that it does in the East, but it still it filters down into sermons, into artwork, and so on. Still becomes part of what's in the air about Jesus's birth. You do see some other texts that talk about other aspects of the infancy of the birth story. You get some expansions of the Magi, for example. There's a text called The Revelation of the Magi that was published a few years ago by my colleague in the U.S., Brent Landau. And in this text, it's somewhat mysterious. We only have one manuscript of it, and it's in Syriac from the 8th century. And parts of it are difficult to read. So it wasn't a very widespread text. But it, again, fills in some of those details. We learn that these magi are from a place in the East called Shir, S-H-I-R. So we get the where they're from. We're told that the word magi comes from the practice of praying in silence. which is not something that people really did in antiquity. So that's a bit new. But also magi, the word magi has nothing to do with that. But magi is too close to magic for some people's sensibilities. So let's explain it another way. And we find out there's actually 12 of them, not 3. And they are, how do they know? How do the Magi know to come to Bethlehem? How do they know that a star is important? And we're told in this text that they are actually descendants of Seth, who is the 3rd child of Adam and Eve. And that Adam told Seth about, gave them this prediction that one day this child will be born who will save humanity. And this gets passed down. It moves over to the east, to the land of Shir with Seth and his descendants. So when the star appears to them, they already know. It's like, oh, this is the star that we've been told about. And one other interesting thing about it, the star is actually Jesus himself. So the star appears to them and then changes into Jesus and speaks, child Jesus. I think he's as a child. And then he becomes a star again, leads them to Bethlehem, and then the star becomes Jesus in the manger. So really interesting tradition, but not widely known, not widespread. But it shows you that people are continuing to work with the stories, though the birth story itself is fairly static as far as I'm aware. But again, all these little things to just keep adding to it. Let's say more about the Magi. Let's say more about the star. Let's say more about other things like that.
That's interesting. Okay. So I see 2 hands up. I see Diana followed by Dick. So Diana, go ahead, and then Dickie, you're next.
This whole thing about the elevation of Mary and the eastern part of the empire or Eastern Europe has a lot to do with who was ruling the Byzantine Empire. And there was in the early days, one historian has said that there was like the 2 people came to the throne. It was a brother and sister. Okay. And the priest or the man who was in charge of the church didn't want her to be participating in the service because she was a woman. And she said, well, Jesus's mother was very important, and she definitely was part of the story of Jesus coming. It was a virgin birth, so therefore women can be pure, can be holy, etc. And that had a lot to do with the emphasis of the Virgin Mary in the Eastern Orthodox, basically because of this sort of thing that was taking place among the major principles of who was running the empire there.
I haven't heard about that. There's a scholar named Stephen Shoemaker who does an awful lot of work on Dormition traditions, and Ali Kattouz, who I think Shirley you've had on your show, does some work on that too. And the earliest, for a long time, people have thought that this elevation of Mary was a bit of a late tradition, like 6th century or 5th century. But it appears that it's earlier than we previously thought, maybe 4th or even 3rd century.
Yeah.
So these things are going back a bit earlier than we expected. And it seems to grow out of Jerusalem among a group of a group in the church that does elevate women. That Ali Kattouz will particularly talk about this as this text really represents a group in which women play a really important role liturgically. They are priestly figures in this group, and so it's really interesting that both the group elevates women over other mainstream Christianity, giving them more opportunities, more leadership opportunities, but also elevates Mary and has those 2 things interact with one another. Shows Mary in the position of kind of a priestly figure. And so really, again, it's showing how these apocryphal texts work with trying to reflect new ideas, new situations, the particular situations of particular churches in different places. And sometimes it causes problems, and other Christian groups don't like it. And so they'll forbid that text or change the text. And so this is one of the areas where it's a bit dynamic in the field right now of trying to figure out exactly when these traditions started. And again, it seems to be that they're earlier than we previously thought. And the consensus again is that this shows a group that really seems to elevate women, and what a great tradition that is.
But this one case, in terms of the royal family in the East, it was descendants of Constantine, so it was really pretty early in the like the 4th or 5th century.
Yeah. I'd have to look into that myself. I'm not aware of it. I know of other legendary stuff related to the creation of these stories, but I'm not aware of that. But I'll check into it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Diana. And Dick, you're next.
All right, I'll make this one quick.
Okay.
The historian William Manchester hypothesizes that the Western Church was interested in converting a lot of pagan religions. Mm-hmm. And those pagan religions needed a goddess, had a goddess.
Yeah.
Were reluctant to give up their goddesses. And so the idea of the Virgin Mary became the goddess Mary to help make their conversions. Are you familiar? Manchester wrote this book, A World Lit Only by Fire, and
it sounds familiar.
Yeah.
But the point you're making, I certainly would agree with. I sometimes think about this the Christianization of the empire as like putting a new coat of paint on something, and it's almost literally what they did. They would take the sometimes they would tear down the temples and build new ones. Sometimes they would just literally give it a fresh coat of paint, Christianize it, and sometimes that's pragmatic. Why destroy a perfectly good building? Sometimes it's a way of attracting these people to convert, or helping them in the conversion process if it's forced. It's the same place you've always been to, but now we worship Jesus here instead of Marduk or whoever. And yeah, the Mary works well to put her in the place of the goddess figure. I think people create gods who are very much like them. Polytheistic religions, they tend to have families of gods, and the dynamics are sometimes, very much like a toxic families sometimes. And you see that also with this various gods who are related to things like travel, like war, like conception, and you get these saints who all get these jobs as well. So this is something, retained by Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, but not so much Protestantism. But yeah, I see how that really works. It's almost a layering of layer Christianity over top of what's already there. And the layering occurs even before Christianity. When Rome was expanding, it would take over these Greek lands, and it would layer its gods over top of the Greek gods. You have a Zeus, well, we have a Jupiter, etc. And it all works quite well. So Christianity, I think, does that over time as well. Sometimes there's reactions to it, like in Protestantism, where they want to just leave all that behind. They want to leave. They want to diminish this elevation of Mary. But certainly, we see it throughout the Christian centuries for sure.
Interesting question. Thank you. So, Diana, we have time for one short question from you, and then we'll close it out. So, go ahead, Diana.
This is just a quick one. It's just hypothetical, really. Was there actually a star that appeared at that time and then disappeared? Do we know about that, astronomically speaking? Or I've often thought this was possibly just a vision for those who saw it. Mm-hmm. Because in the same way that the shepherds apparently saw angels speaking to them, and it says that they were terrified of these angels until they realised what it was. And I'm just wondering if anybody else thinks maybe that star was a vision.
Mm-hmm. Was there really a star? Let's do that first. Certainly, what earlier scholars who were more still connected to faith, so we would call them more theologians, they would try to find evidence for what they see in the Bible. So they would look for Noah's Ark. They would look for discussions of the Red Sea parting, things like that. And so you have to start in the Christian tradition. So they would try to find some information that would suggest that there was a celestial phenomenon at that time, like some kind of a Venus crossing, I don't know, Mercury or something. I don't know. And those have kind of failed. But I think that's really trying to go in the wrong direction. I think what you have in biblical texts is a lot of what we might call legendary material, things that we shouldn't expect to find historically. I give you another example. When Jesus died on the cross, there was an eclipse. So here we have another celestial phenomenon. Do we have any record of an eclipse around that time? I don't think so. But the writers are just trying to show how the divine world and the earthly world are kind of coming together in some way. So they have God directing events or showing signs of events happening. And another thing I could quickly say about this, we have lots of stories of other figures in the ancient world who have miraculous births. And sometimes these stories also include celestial phenomena showing the sign of it. So it becomes kind of a motif. And when you see this motif happening so often, you start to think, well, this can't possibly be true. Not every person is a combination of human and divine. Not every person who's special gets a star or some other sign in the heavens. So it's a motif. It's a way of showing the divine world and the earthly world coming together in some special way. So as a biblical scholar who's trained to be more objective and try to think of natural explanations instead of supernatural ones, my tendency is to go towards this is a literary motif, not something that actually really happened.
Well, okay, Tony. So I think what's fun here is that right after you here, we're going to have Karen Hagen stay with us, who's going to talk to us about how to find the faith part of the story. So we're glad that Karen's with us tonight. But this has been so helpful for us, Tony, to really think about the stories, why the stories became so important, how they became built upon. And I think you've given us a lot to think about. I really do appreciate your giving us an apocryphal Christmas. So I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I also want to just say that this was the December 2025 Bible and Beyond discussion titled Wishing You an Apocryphal Christmas with our guest scholar, Tony Burke. So these Bible and Beyond discussions are led by a knowledgeable scholar who provides a thoughtful overview of one or more early Christian texts, as we've done. For the last half hour, participants have a chance to ask their own questions. And we usually meet on the fourth Monday of the month from 8 to 9 p.m. And I want to remind you one more time, please don't forget to go to patreon.com/Bible and Beyond to sign up and become eligible for our special events going forward. And don't forget to ask for your Patreon discount coupon if you're signing up for the Secret Revelation of John course starting on January 6th. So now let me tell you who's coming next month. We have Professor Lance Janot, who's going to take us deeper into the Gospel of Judas to see how it might give us more insights on the disciples of Jesus. And that'll be on the fourth Monday, which will be January 26th. So now please join me in giving a special thanks to Tony for opening up the world of the Apocryphal Christmases with us. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.